Hey Ryan, hey Matt, how's it going?
Going
How you
well. How
doing?
about you?
Yeah, good.
Going
So
on, Jack?
I know Dan watches tennis, but do you guys ever follow tennis?
I used to play when I was a kid, but that's about it.
Okay. So like I played basically well not my whole life, but I started at a young age and then I played at the high school level. I worked actually in pro tennis as a web writer for the ATP for a while. So I've worked, longer in hockey, but I've done quite a bit in tennis as well. And I always find that the better I understand tennis, the more clearly I see things on the ice. And that's because, in hockey, you have one puck and then 12 skaters, whereas in tennis, you have one ball and either two or four players. So there's actually way less things going on in tennis at any given moment. And for me, it's interesting because some of the smaller patterns that you see in tennis, it is kind of applicable in hockey. Obviously, it's not the same thing, but I think as someone who maybe doesn't follow tennis at all, watching tennis with an educated eye might actually give you some ideas for doing hockey stuff. So what I'll do is I'll start the presentation now. Let's see. So have any of you guys watched the Australian Open at all? Yes, no, maybe.
Not me. So
Okay, so one of the matches that I got to watch was a semifinal between Naomi Osaka and Serena Williams. So Serena Williams obviously is one of the all-time best players in history, and Osaka ended up winning the Australian Open, and she's up to 4 Grand Slams now. So one of the really the rising young stars in the game. And I thought some of the patterns that we see in there are actually really applicable to hockey if you look at things on a more fundamental level. And so, like I'm Chinese, so, here's kind of the Oriental angle. But, when we go back to the art of war, it says strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is a noise before defeat. So, um, basically, you have an overall strategy, but then the tactics is really the nuts and bolts of what allows you to implement it. So, the reason why all my stuff is called hockey tactics is because the strategy is you want to outscore the other team. So the strategy in hockey is generally pretty straightforward. You might do it, let's say in a low event way, which is you try to win 1-0 or 2-1, or you might do it in a high event way in terms of winning, 6-4 or 7-5 or 8-6, whatever. But basically the point is always to outscore, and then generally that's going to go through outshooting. But the strategy is always going to be out to outscore. Um, so really on a higher level, it's, how you outscore teams is you direct your strength to your opponent's weakness. So that implies, first of all, knowing your strength, and second, knowing their weakness. But also you want to avoid your own weakness, exposing your own weakness to your opponent's strength, right? And that's like pretty obvious first level stuff that, if you're a small and quick team and you're good with the puck, then you want the puck. If you're a big and strong and intimidating team, you still like to have the puck, but maybe you want to force battles, or you want to shoot and retrieve, or you want to create screens, or you want to box people out. Like, basically the strategy is going to come from your weakness, uh, the intersection of your weakness and the other team's strength and vice versa. So the tactics really, for me, it's like, you want to look for strength on weakness. You want to avoid weakness on strength. But tactics for me come in really handy when you have a situation where it's strength on strength. So let's say, you deploy your first line against the other team's first line. So how does Patrice Bergeron outmaneuver Austin Matthews? Or how does Philip Deneau shut down Connor McDavid, right? Or weakness on weakness. Like, is your fourth line able to do things to win their shifts against the other team's fourth line? So, those are kind of the mini matchups. It's not so much related to your overall strategy, but it ties in with some of the tactical elements that you want to employ. So let's say, against a certain D pair, you want to dump in more than you carry, or vice versa, right? So that's a tactical element inside of your strategy. It's a device, it's a building block. So, for me, tennis, especially singles tennis, is a really great venue for this because it's so simple, right? You have two players, they never intermingle, they're separated by the net. Every player has a forehand, every player has a backhand. In addition, 90% of tennis players are right-handed. Like, I haven't played against a lefty in years. So generally speaking, if you look at this court here, the forehand corner is going to be on the right, and then the backhand corner is going to be on the left. And once again, 90% of tennis players have a stronger forehand than backhand. I happen to have a better backhand than forehand. That's unusual, but generally speaking, you can almost replace, forehand with strength and backhand as weakness. And that's generally how most players construct their strategy, right? They want to use their forehand, they want to avoid their backhand. So there's a tennis coach and analyst by the name of Craig O'Shaughnessy who's done a lot of good tactical and analytical tracking in tennis. And one of his innovations is not only are we splitting the court into halves, so the forehand and the backhand half, we're splitting into 4 segments. So A is the traditional forehand corner, B is on the forehand side but more central, C is central but more on the backhand side, and then D is the backhand corner. And then if you look on the other side, it's flipped. So if you look on the upper half of the screen, A is the forehand again, B is the forehand, C is on the backhand side, D is the backhand corner, right? And the reason why this is important is because in Craig's research, he's found that at higher levels of play, the tennis court is actually not symmetrical in the sense that what the Federers, the Nadals, the Williams, the Djokovic, what they look to do is they look to run around their backhand and cover 3/4 of the court with their forehand. So imagine that Roger Federer is playing on this lower court here. He's standing in C, covering 3/4 of the court with his forehand, and then he's pummeling the other player's backhand. And that's generally how pro players they set up their strategy. They want to run around their backhand, control the court with their forehand, and then attack and push the other player back to their backhand corner, right? So um, and that's what Serena Williams does. She might have the best forehand of any player in women's tennis history, certainly. So her best play is she's going to kind of cheat away from the forehand corner and then control the play from C, right? And this is very important because what Naomi Osaka does is, she almost hits as well as Serena does, but mostly she moves a lot better and she has a very good serve. So what she's trying to do is she's trying to take Serena's strength, which is the forehand from C. She's trying to take it off the table by attacking A at very strategic points in the game. So the strategy for Williams and for Osaka, they're the same. They want to use their forehand against the other player's backhand, but the tactical wrinkle in Osaka's game is strategically she's going to go to A so that Serena cannot deploy her best shot, and also that forces Serena to run. And when Serena's on the run, she's not nearly as good. So I'll show you a few examples, but this is my quote. So do things that make no sense until they make total sense. So once again, Serena's best shots are forehand, but Osaka says, hey, I'm going to feed you more forehand, except it's going to be in A instead of in C. So instead of running away from Serena's forehand and playing to D and maybe taking more risks, all she's doing is she's playing to A or she's playing to B, getting Serena to run and getting her off of her pitcher's mound. Right? Okay, so this is from the semifinal, which happened a couple of days ago. Now, it's a very important moment because in a tennis set, it's the first player to 6 games. So right now, Osaka is serving at 5-3, 40-15, which means she has 2 set points. So if she wins this point, she wins the first set, which is obviously a very important building block, right? It's 2 out of 3. So this is the equivalent of, let's say, you have a 2-on-1 and the game is tied. This is the kind of the high leverage situation that you really need to play your best. So Osaka serves. She serves down the middle here to Serena's backhand. Okay, and now Serena returns the ball down the middle, which is a safe percentage play. And now you see both players, they're central, except Osaka has a forehand, right? Now, normally what would happen is if you're playing against Serena, who has a really strong forehand, and you have a neutral ball like this, you're going to say, well, let me go to her backhand and put her on the back foot, right? That's from This is C, kind of C, from C to C or C to D. That's the more logical play. But what Osaka does is she realizes that, she wants to be safe, but she wants to threaten as well. And she thinks that if she plays to C and it's a little bit short, Serena's going to run around and control the point with her forehand. So to avoid that happening, what Osaka is going to do is she's going to play to A. Okay. She plays to A, and Serena is actually leaning away from her forehand because against most players, the next shot's going to be in the backhand half of the court. But this kind of, gets her really off balance. She lunges and the ball kind of pops up. It's not a very good shot from Serena. The very next shot, now you see Osaka's really well entrenched in C. This is a very good offensive position for her. And, normally the percentage shot is to go to C or go to D for a winner or an almost winner. But the critical thing here is that, instead of being set up in her backhand corner, Serena was dragged to her forehand side, and now this half the court is wide open. And then so she thinks, oh, I'm in trouble now. I'm going to lean toward my backhand side to get a racket on Osaka's offensive forehand. But then Osaka's kind of like one level deeper still. So she's like, Serena knows she's in trouble. She's going to run back to her backhand side. Let me hit behind her into A for a winner. And that's the first set. So let me show you exactly how this plays out. Right. You guys see this?
Yeah.
So once again, serves down the middle. Okay. Plays the forehand. Serena's in trouble. She's running to her backhand side, plays behind her. And that's the first set. So it's like, on two of her forehands, Osaka does things that doesn't make sense, which is she's taking her forehand into Serena's better corner, but it makes total sense because Serena's leading the other way, right? So during the time I worked for the ATP, I had the opportunity to interview a lot of players, and the favorite article I've ever written when I worked there was an article about mental toughness with John Isner, who at the time was a top 10 player. And for him, we talked a little bit about strategy, less so about tactics, but more about the overarching strategy. And for him, he's 6'10". He's one of the biggest servers in tennis history. He's got one of the best records in tie breaks and on pressure points in tennis history because oftentimes he's serving and he can win the point outright with an ace or with a very forcing serve. And for him, uh, he's not nearly as effective on the return, but he doesn't really care so much about that. For him, executing under pressure is focusing on what he does well, which is serving and getting a forehand and using his power to dictate. So the other example I have from the tennis world is Denis Shapovalov. So Denis Shapovalov is left-handed, which is unusual, but he's I would say one of the most talented players on the ATP tour, but also someone who I think is underachieving a little bit. And for me, that's because he's got so much skill. He has so many tools in his toolbox that he doesn't always use the best one. And he doesn't always play to his strength. He has a lot of good shots, but sometimes he shies away from the best shot. So here he's playing against Felix Auger-Aliassime, who's also another very good young Canadian player. But, Auger-Aliassime, I would say, is a more balanced player in terms of his tactical choices. I would say he makes better use of what he has, even though he's a little bit less powerful than Shapovalov is. And actually, he wins this match against Shapovalov, even though he's seeded number 20 instead of 11 for Shapovalov. So very similar situation here, except Shapovalov is serving down set point. So if Auger-Aliassime wins this point, then he wins the first set. So once again, Shapovalov serves down the middle to Aliassim's backhand. So far so good. He's hitting to his opponent's weaker shot. Now, Auger-Aliassime, what he does is he blocks the ball back to Shapovalov's backhand corner, which is a very sensible play. Okay. And the problem with Shapovalov is he's so caught up with targeting his opponent's weakness, which generally speaking is the backhand, that he plays away from his own strength in doing so. So for him here, he's pushed his opponent back. Okay. He's set up. He has a good weight transfer into the ball. He should be going backhand cross court to take advantage of his opponent's position. Instead, what he does is he's so desperate to find his opponent's backhand that he hits it kind of right down the line here to the backhand, but central. So basically, instead of having to lunge 4 steps to the ball, Auger Aliassime only has to take 1 step to the ball here, right? So Shapovalov hits the ball kind of down the middle of the court to the backhand. And then you see like Aliassime's barely moved. So he hits the ball, barely has to move. He blocks it down the middle toward Shapovalov's forehand. And now Shapovalov is in a bit of trouble because you see how he's on his back foot here. So as soon as it's almost like a sumo match where if you're able to push your opponent onto his heels, his power goes down, his consistency goes down, and he's way easier to read in terms of where he's going, right? So here, Shapovalov doesn't really recognize that his position is not that great. So for him, he's like, I'm going to take my strength, which is the forehand, to my opponent's weakness again, which is right down in this area, okay? But you see, he's on his back foot. He probably has to take something off the ball just to make it land or play it a little bit safer instead of you can really hit it hard if he just goes back to the bigger court in this corner, right? But for him, it's like he's so caught up with targeting the weakness that he's playing away from his own strength, which is the forehand to the open court. So what happens here is Shapovalov hits it to the backhand corner right at Auger Aliassime again, and then he hits it like 3 inches long, and then Auger Aliassime wins the set. So let me show you what this looks like. So serve down the middle. So far, so good. So now he plays the small court to the backhand side instead of playing to the wide open court to the forehand side. See, it forces his shot. His opponent barely has to move. Now he's on the back foot, and now he should go back to the big court just to regain his initiative, but he forces it again to the small court. He hits it a little bit long, and then it's set for his opponent. So, here are basically 2 case studies where, how tactics and strategy intermingle. And I'm curious to see what kind of parallels you guys can make to hockey or what this reminds you of.
Well, outside of hockey, it kind of reminds me with 2 things, right? The first thing I think of is I think you had a quote where it's like, or a tweet where you ask people who didn't watch hockey what they thought about the game because they generally have new insights or they're not stuck in that dogma. And the first thing I thought of was if I'm on the forehand, I want to play at C. If I'm a righty, first thing I want to do is play at C. But like I said, I don't watch tennis, but I want to make them move more than I want to play to the backhand because everybody probably has a decent backhand, but I want to get them moving left and right, which changes the court. So I think that's kind of interesting because it plays to your thoughts. And then the other thing I think of Tom Brady right away. If you watch football, I mean, he's not a guy that's going to outthrow you. He doesn't throw the hardest. He doesn't run. He's not a running quarterback, but he just plays to his strength, which is IQ, and he just dinks and dunks you and wins 7 Super Bowls.
Yeah, and the whole forehand backhand thing for the most obviously translatable example in hockey is let's say you have a 2-on-2 off the rush, and let's say you're playing against Jeff Petrie and Joel Edmondson, right? Let's say you're Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. You're going 2-on-2 on Petrie and Edmondson. And, Petrie is one of the best skating defensemen, one of the best rush defenders in the game, whereas Edmondson is pretty exploitable, right? So the question is, who do you attack off the rush? Do you attack Petrie first, or do you attack Edmondson first? What do you guys think?
I think I'm a little bit, and I'm gonna kind of connect this back to something that resonated with me. One of the things that you said that resonated me is with I don't know how you say his last name, Dennis Shapovalov.
Shap. Yeah.
I butchered it. I still butchered it, but with him, you said that he's got all the tools in his toolbox, but he doesn't know how to use the right ones. And so I think that's really interesting, and kind of bring it back to the 2-on-2 situation. You've got options, right? Like if you want to attack Edmondson, then you've still got one of the best. If you beat him, say Matthews beats Edmondson and it's a 2-on-1, then you're still playing as one of the best rush defenders in the NHL. So maybe you attack the strong link first, so that the weak link is the only thing that's left, and you can exploit that, because in a situation where it's 2-on-2, a weak defenseman might get bailed out by the strong defenseman if he needs help. But if you can beat the strong defenseman, then the weak defenseman is at an even greater disadvantage.
Exactly. So that's exactly what I get at. What I want to get at is the same thing that Osaka did to Serena. So it's like you attack the forehand first so that the backhand is wide open, or you attack the forehand first so that she cannot hit a forehand from C, because she can't be an A and C at the same time. So it's like, if I'm Austin Matthews and I'm going down, let's say the right wing, I'm going down the left wing against Petrie and Edmondson, I want to attack Petrie head on and hope that Marner is going to escape between the two checks. Because if we're able to isolate Petrie on a 2-on-1, then Edmondson is probably going to make a mistake on the following play, and then you can either have, it's probably going to be a one on 0 breakaway if I can make a good 2-on-1 play on Petrie and then find a follow-up, right? So it's like, whereas if I attack Edmondson first, then maybe Petrie, does something on the backside that makes sure that I don't have a follow-up play, right? So it's like, you want to go to the strength first. And I think that's like a very counterintuitive thing, which doesn't quite make sense at the initial level, but makes sense in the grand scheme of things once you kind of map it out. Right? Anybody else?
And kind of sorry, to that point, I think the quote that you included, your quote in there, just totally encompasses that with the do. It was something about doing something that doesn't make any sense until it makes total sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think attacking the stronger link might not make sense at first, but then you look at what might come from it and it makes total sense.
Yeah, if you look at the creative players or the high-end playmakers, like a lot of what they do well, like, or a lot of the high-end plays that they make, if you back it up a couple of seconds, they'll do something totally weird, like the Gretzky curl, right? So you're attacking off the rush, you might have numbers, or you might have the initiative. Why all of a sudden are you stopping and turning away from the net? It makes no sense, right? But what you want to do is you want to hit a second layer that has even more speed that's not being covered, and then they have a breakaway or they have a 2-on-1, right? So or if what my favorite shootout move is, you start the puck on your backhand, because the goalie is going to be like, well, you're probably not going to shoot on your backhand because most players, they don't have such a good backhand, but going backhand forehand is a much easier and a much more higher percentage shot than going forehand backhand shelf, because forehand backhand shelf is tough, but backhand forehand shelf, that's easy, like anybody can do it, right? So there's lots of little spots like this in hockey where you can use this kind of, this 2x2 decision matrix to kind of influence how you want to set it up.
Where else do you kind of see this? Well, I mean, there's a bunch of them, I'm sure you pull up, but where else do you kind of see this 2x2 decision matrix being used? Is there something that sticks out to you most?
Well, like to bring it back to your football example, right? Like, are you running or are you passing, right? If if you read a run defense, do you still run? If you read a pass defense, do you still pass, right? Maybe you add an extra wrinkle because like I'm not too familiar with football strategy, but that's kind of what the game comes down to, right? It's like, if you pass and the other team reads pass, then it might be an incomplete, or it's probably going to be an incomplete, right? If you run and the other team reads run, then it's either going to be no gains, a small loss, or maybe a small gain, right? If you pass and the other team reads run, then it's a long play or a touchdown. If you run and the other team reads pass, then it's probably like a medium gain or whatever it is, right? So you're always kind of working within this 2x2 matrix. You want to get, you always want to end up in a situation where you pass and they read run. So the whole game, it's like I've never been a football coach, obviously, but it's like you have maybe 15, 20, 30 plays where you want to kind of peak at the right moment and find that mismatch at a critical moment in the game.
And you said the word mismatch, and I think that just kind of brought a thought to my head in about basketball. I don't really know anything about basketball, but I watch the games, right? And you see the mismatches when either a guard gets is being defended by a big man, or a big man is being defended by a guard. And you see that it's clear in basketball the advantages that, say, a smaller player has over a bigger player, or a bigger player has over a smaller player, and they definitely take advantage of that. Like the smaller player will make a quick step back and take a shot, or the bigger player will post up. But in hockey, I think that could be kind of applicable when you see like maybe a defenseman who's not as comfortable rushing the puck and on a 3-on-2, and you'll see a defending defenseman take a step and cover a passing lane to force them to make that decision they're not comfortable making. Whereas, and I just kind of like, I thought that mismatch was really interesting in terms of this tactical hit teams in unexpected ways, I guess, conversation.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of coaches ask me for, system sheets, or like what's the best drill, or, what's the best strategy, but like this is what the game is, right? It's not the high level strategy, because a high level strategy, there's only a few of them and it's pretty straightforward, but it's the low level tactics, or the individual reads, or the wrinkles that you can throw in there that's really going to make the difference. Because to be honest, like, a lot of coaches are known to be good defensive coaches because they can run a certain scheme and they can get their players to buy in or to execute it. But very few are known as high level offensive coaches, because the best you can do is maybe, teach these little wrinkles over time and then let the players play, right? So the players end up getting most of the credit, which they should, because they make the plays, right? But um, it's almost like a lot of offense happens when things don't go quite as planned. There's a bit of a broken play, or there's a bit of a bad read by the defense, or a really good read by the forward, and it just kind of happens. And in tennis, I find it's a way simpler game because you have one ball and two players, or maybe four players tops. But whereas in hockey, you have 12 skaters. So things happen at the same speed, but there's less stuff happening, so you can tease it out better, right? Like, even if you guys are not big tennis fans, like if I walk you through a point, you know exactly what's going on, and you know exactly what the tactical mindset is from the players, because you see it in their body language, or you see it in their shot selection. And hockey players are like that too. Like the good ones, they're always thinking about these kind of things. So it's almost like you have 2 or 3 or 4 tennis matches going on at the same time, and that's hockey. So there's always one guy on his toes, one guy on his heels, one guy who sees an opening, one guy who's reacting, one guy who has no idea what's going on, one guy who's like 2 steps ahead. And that's hockey. So for me, like, understanding tennis really well gets you into that elite athlete mindset of, I know my strength, I know your weaknesses, I'm trying to find ways to get there and create that mismatch.
This is sort of like the framework that I think you mentioned it, or maybe it's Belfry, talking about like bending the game to your will.
Yep.
And like how Yossi plays a different game than everyone else does.
Yep.
This is almost like the framework that they use, where they're just like, I'm going to play to my strengths and attack your strengths.
Well, it's like it's a power move, right? So if you're a good player, let's say you're Austin Matthews, or you're Jack Eichel, or you're Connor McDavid, it's like early in the game, what you might do as almost like a psychological tool is you say, I'm going to put my strength against your strength. And if your strength cracks, I know I own you. Like, there's nothing you can do, right? So it's like if, Roger Federer plays against a guy who's ranked 85 in the world, in the first game, Federer might challenge this guy's forehand, even though it's his better shot, because he knows that if I can create doubt on your strength initially, then like you got nothing, you got nowhere else to go, right? So this is like, so for me, like the thing that's really interesting is a lot of coaches, they'll try to lock the game down, play for 2-1 or 1-0, or keep things really tight defensively. But if you're a really good team like Colorado or Vegas or Toronto or whatever, like you want to get into a track meet because you know that the other team has no chance to keep up with you if you get on a roll early, right? I mean, obviously Toronto goes up 5-1, loses against the Senators, but shit happens, right? But that's the overall idea, is that if your strength is better than the other guy's strength, then not only is it a big advantage for you tactically, but also psychologically, it's a huge advantage. So it's like, if you ever get into a fist fight, right? You don't want to be the guy taking the first punch, even though you know that the other guy has a better chin and he has a better hook. You still want to take your hook to his chin first, right? You never want to be the one taking the first shot. So yeah, there's something of value in that as well. We have about 8 minutes left, so let me just open it up. Like, do you guys have like any kind of random questions or anything that's not related to this? Yep.
Jack, back to your first point where you said where you're talking about tennis and players that are more often dominant on their forehand than their backhand. What came to my mind is when Babcock was coaching the Leafs, and he had a lot of trouble with the defensemen in Toronto because I think there's 5D that were left shots and only 1D with right shots, and that really bugged him. And the GM wasn't getting any right shots. When you have a guy, so yourself, for example, you're stronger on your backhand than your forehand. So you're if you were a defenseman, if you're a left-handed shot defenseman playing for the Leafs at the time, you would be able to get more pucks in different situations, or you'd be better at getting pucks differently than other players that are normally better on their forehand.
Yeah. So the thing that like always puzzled me about this whole thing is I thought the overall conversation about the whole lefty righty thing was very negative. It's like we don't have enough righties instead of saying we have a lot of good lefties. So to give you an example, I had always pushed to play Dermott on the right just because like he's a player who should be in the lineup, who brings a lot of things. But in I think it was game 7, the second time we played Boston. So it was game 7 2019, I believe.
Never
Uh,
ends well.
there, yeah, Babs had Jake Gardner and Travis Dermott on the same pair together, and Dermott actually scored because Gardner went D to D and Dermott had a one timer. Okay. So because most teams play a lefty righty, you don't have that one timer. Whereas if you have two lefties, you have it, and it's predictable. Like that if you go from left to right, it's going to be a one timer, right? Whereas with the lefty righty, sometimes you have it, most times you don't. So for me, like we were always like too negative about this whole thing because we like to play with the puck, we like to play in the ozone, we like to move it around. Why not set up some D to D one timer plays because we have two lefties and two
Yeah.
good players, right?
Yeah,
And
no, I completely agree.
yeah, so the optics was never that, which I was really disappointed about.
Like there definitely is like certain situations on the rink. Like say the puck is getting rimmed around the boards on the right side and the defenseman's trying to keep it in the blue line. You're a lot better off being a righty and getting that puck coming along the boards and having to turn your whole body over to stop it with your left and then bring that back to, and it takes that extra second to bring it back to your forehand. If you're an elite player on your backhand, some guys are better on their backhands, their forehand, they can get it. That makes them so much more valuable in like little situations like that. So when you said that you were a rarity and saying that your backhand was actually better in tennis, that like just a situation like that just instantly popped in my head where I'm like, hey, well, this is where if you had like 5 left-handed defensemen on your team, I'd be able to go and say, okay, this guy is definitely playing his off wing.
Yeah, so this, I think if you're proactive about it, I think it's better than to be very reactive and very passive about it. Right? So we got 5 minutes left. Anybody else have something?
I just kind of wanted to one thing that kind of stirred with me with the whole Travis Dermott conversation was I thought it's very interesting that this whole theme kind of surrounding today is turning weaknesses, like recognizing your weaknesses and turning them into strengths, because the way that the Leafs might have played back then with the negative thought of, oh, we've got 5 left shot defensemen. Oh, we're gonna have to, on a DD pass, we're gonna have to either pass it back or he's gonna have to catch it on his backhand. And it might be really difficult to, in the way they teach defensemen, is to catch the puck on their forehand in the offensive zone, and maybe he's gonna have to catch it on his backhand. But maybe taking a different point of view and being a little bit more innovative with it, like you said, with the one-timers, and maybe coming up with different ways to attack and different ways to defend. Like maybe their D to D pass, like the behind the net D to D pass, is going to be easier. You don't have to bank it off the boards, and you've got a rim from that one side, an easy rim out the weak side. So I think that that's really interesting. And what are some other ways do you think they could take advantage of weaknesses like that are just, like, are there any other examples like the Leafs blue line?
Well, it's like the example that comes to mind is more like at a developmental level, right? If you have a player who's really small early in his career, like a peewee player who's like 5'1", those players actually they're in a great position to acquire skills because they know that they have to get better, otherwise they get left behind. So they tend to be the ones who work the hardest, or like bridge skills, right? Like if you're not the biggest, if you're not the fastest, if you're not the smartest, if you don't have a good shot, then you're going to be intrinsically motivated to either keep up, get ahead, or get left behind. So whether it's you're a coach with a very limited roster makeup, or you're a player who lacks certain attributes, or you're down in a game and the other team, like if the other team is leading by 3 goals at after the second intermission, I mean, they're probably going to win. Like you're going to lose that game more often than not. But you think, okay, if I get 1, they're going to be a little bit scared. If I get 2, they're going to start panicking. If I get 3, we're going to smell shit on our bench from theirs, right? So it's like either you can be really depressed or you can be really excited about this opportunity. And I think that's the whole idea of tactics, is that there's always like it's like that martial arts symbol, like the white and the black. It's like there's black in the white and there's white in the black. So there's a weakness in the strength, but there's also a strength in the weakness. So tactics is about how to find it for me. That makes sense? Any parting thoughts?
It's like you can see it as it's almost a mental thing, right? You can see it as a weakness, or you can work it to make your strength, and then now you've got something like kind of like a bridge skill where it's like, now I have something that somebody else doesn't have. Now that's my advantage.
Yeah, and for me, that like I've known coaches who, like, when their teams are losing, they're actually really calm, they're really encouraging, and they're really like kind to their players. And then they get really like amped up and nervous and like high strung when they're actually winning. And this is kind of, it makes sense when you look at it that way, right? Because when you're down, you know that you have more in it to give, whereas when you're up, like you don't want to lose that urgency. So it's almost like it's always a contradiction, and I think that's the contradiction is what's interesting about this. So it was great to have you. Thanks for joining, Dan, and see you guys next week.
Thanks, Jack.
All right,
Thank
take
you
care.
so
Yeah,
much.
guys.
Yeah, bye bye.
Awesome. Thank you.